In the winter of 2016, a man set off alone in the frozen wilderness of the Tasmanian mountains. He took check-ins with his family very seriously. He told his daughter he'd be back after 6 days, but when that day came and went, with not even a text coming through, she knew something was wrong. What followed was one of the most grueling nightmares in the state's history. This is the horrifying story of Trevor Tolput. In July 2016, the Overland track in Tasmania was quiet. The crowds were gone. This is when 55-year-old Trevor Tolput arrived at the edge of the Tasmanian wilderness, all alone. He'd done this trek before, but in the summer. The Overland track stretches 40 miles or 65 kilometers through the alpine spine of the island, from Ronnie Creek to Lake St. Clair. And in the warmer months, it's still no joke. Even then, it demands planning, fitness, and respect. But in the winter, well, the track becomes something else entirely. Snow buries the trail markers, and temperatures plummet well below freezing. By midwinter, only a handful of people attempt it, and those who do know exactly what they're getting into. Trevor was intelligent, but he underestimated what winter on the Overland track actually meant. He liked systems, planning, and order. But even his discipline had blind spots. He didn't bring a personal locator beacon. No GPS, no waterproof gloves, no waterproof pants, no snowshoes, no radio, no backup plan. He did bring a sleeping bag, a jet boil stove, and some oats, and a little pasta and a rain jacket. He also had a handwritten itinerary he'd left with the ranger at the visitor center in Cradle Mountain. The plan was simple: walk the Overland track solo, starting July 9th and finish by the 14th. No detours, no summits, nothing unplanned, just the main track. He told his daughter Lauren that he might buy a beacon. Might. But when she met him in Launceston, Tasmania before the trip, she saw that he hadn't. When she suggested bringing a heavier coat, he brushed it off. "I'll be moving the whole time," he said. "Movement is warmth." It wasn't arrogance, it was a kind of certainty. A belief that if you followed the plan would protect you. On the morning of July 9th, Lauren picked Trevor up early from his hotel. They planned to reach Cradle Mountain by 7:30 a.m. When they arrived at Ronnie Creek, the official starting point of the Overland track, she pulled over and helped him with his pack. At the trailhead kiosk, he signed the green logbook. Name, Trevor Tolput. Direction, north to south. ETA, July 14th. What Trevor didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that something completely out of his control was about to seal his fate. He zipped his jacket and smiled at Lauren, his hands buried deep in his pockets. "See you on the other side," he said. Then he turned and walked into the trees. The Overland swallows sound fast. Within minutes, there's nothing but wind and footfall. Trevor followed a familiar wooden path through the button grass plains, toward the dark outline of Cradle Cirque. Behind him, the trailhead faded into gray. He moved fast. Hikers later recalled seeing him near Waterville Valley Hut on day 1, already hours ahead of a group that had left just after him. They assumed he was a veteran. And he was, kind of. By day 2, the snow started falling steadily, the kind that doesn't melt. It just accumulates, reshapes the land, and hides the trail entirely. The wind picked up. Temperatures dropped well below freezing at night. Each day forward, the margin of error continued to shrink. But Trevor pushed on, undeterred. At one point, he shared space with another group led by David Crothers, 3 experienced winter hikers with proper gear. They noticed his Crocs, which were used as hut shoes. They noticed how little he carried, and they noticed his outerwear, which just didn't look right. Trevor's rain jacket looked like it could handle bad weather, but it couldn't. It wasn't seam sealed, which meant water could enter in through the tiny holes in the fabric that had been stitched. Technically, the material was waterproof, but the jacket itself was not. At best, it was water resistant. And in alpine conditions, that distinction matters. It also wasn't breathable. His outerwear wasn't the only problem. Trevor hadn't packed a beanie or insulated gloves. It's well known that a significant amount of body heat escapes through the head. Still, he seemed fine. He was quiet, capable, and in good spirits. He kept at his own pace, ate alone, and slept early. One of the other hikers asked him if he was carrying a beacon. Trevor said no. He pointed to his head and said, "I've got this." When fellow hiker David Crothers told Trevor he'd see him at Windmere Hut, Trevor just shook his head. He planned to skip that hut entirely and push through to Pelion Hut, a much longer day's hike and much more risky. He made it. On July 10th, Trevor reached Pelion Hut and stayed the night. The next morning, July 11th, David Crothers arrived at the hut and was surprised to see Trevor still there. Trevor told him he decided to rest a second night as he had attempted to climb Mount Oakley but had to turn back due to bad weather. He seemed calm, in control. The Pelion Plateau in winter is a place of absolute stillness. By July 12th, Trevor had been on the trail for 4 days. He passed Cradle Mountain, climbed over Marion's Lookout, and skirted the edge of frozen alpine lakes. Now he was pushing south, towards CO.AG Hut. This section of the Overland track is high, exposed, and unforgiving in cold weather. On summer days, it's one of the most beautiful stretches of the trail. But in winter, storms move through the valleys with almost no warning. And that's exactly what happened. Late on July 12th, a cold front swept through central Tasmania, dropping temperatures below 5 degrees Celsius or 23 degrees Fahrenheit. A fresh layer of snow settled on the alpine range, obscuring everything beneath it. Trail markers vanished, track edges blurred into drifts. It was a complete whiteout. Trevor was somewhere out there. We don't know exactly where he camped that night, or even if he made it to CO.AG Hut. What we do know comes from the logbooks. He signed in at Windmere Hut on July 10th, then Pelion Hut on the 11th. After that, nothing. The trail went dark. It's possible he reached CO.AG and simply didn't sign the log, but unlikely. And the next group to arrive would later check in and confirm no entry, no trace. And while each hut is only a day's walk apart in the summer, in the snow, it's a different situation. One ranger would later note that Trevor specifically needed some items to survive this part of the track, but he didn't have them. He needed heavyweight boots. He needed an emergency bivvy, which is a well-insulated sleeping bag that covers your entire body. He also had no traction aids, which go into your boots and help you get over ice. On July 13th, back in Launceston, Lauren checked her phone again. Still no word from her father. But that wasn't entirely unexpected. He said he'd be out of contact. She figured he was still on track for their scheduled meeting on the 14th. She then started planning what they would do when he got back. Maybe grab a nice dinner, have a good sleep, and then go to their favorite cafe the next day. What she didn't know was that a second cold front was already moving through the central highlands, one that would directly hit Trevor. That group of 3 hikers left Pelion Hut a day after Trevor. They were slower and more methodical. All 3 had GPS units, full winter gear, and laminated maps. They waded through waist-deep powder and moved cautiously across exposed ridge lines, navigating by compass when needed. When they arrived at CO.AG Hut, they checked the logbook. No new entries. No sign of Trevor. They assumed he was ahead, that he'd moved fast and reached Bert Nichols' hut or even the final hut, Narcissus. But when they got there, again, no entry. The logbook at the end of the Overland track was blank under his name. This was the first real sign that something had gone wrong. Somewhere between Pelion and Narcissus, Trevor had vanished. People have died within meters of shelter before. On the morning of July 14th, Lauren drove to the visitor center at Cynthia Bay. She waited. Then, no sign of him. A ranger checked the hut logbooks and confirmed her worst fear. Trevor had not signed out. The alarm was raised. At 5 p.m., Tasmania police were notified. Search and rescue was activated and a winter emergency response swung into motion. That night, snow fell again over the track. Visibility was near zero. Helicopters were grounded. The next day, conditions remained unstable. Still no word from Trevor, still no distress beacon, still no sign. The search began with what little they had, his rough itinerary, the hut logs. They flew helicopters when weather allowed, sent in ground teams on snowshoes and skis, called in volunteers, trackers, and alpine experts. Each day, they scoured a different section of the trail, around Pelion Gap, Pine Forest Moor, the valleys near Dew Crane Range. Nothing. But behind the scenes, the clock was already running out. Hypothermia in these conditions can kill in hours, and no one even knew if Trevor had made it to the huts beyond Pelion. Searchers looked for footprints, clothing, or just anything, but after multiple snowfalls, the landscape had reset. Everything was buried, the track was quiet again, even the birds had disappeared. Still, the search kept going. Lauren stayed close to her phone. Every time it rang, her heart raced. Every silence felt louder than the last. She tried to think like him. Where would he go? How far would he push? And maybe he's just behind schedule. Maybe he was closer than anyone realized. But for a brief moment, it seemed like he was. And at around 4:15 p.m. on July 14th, a hiking group south of the Overland track caught sight of a lone figure in the snow. Simon Cuban, a seasoned hiker with over 30 years of experience. He was traveling with his partner and their 11-year-old son. They had left Pine Valley Hut earlier that day, a trek that should have taken 3 hours, but in the storm took them nearly 6. Snowdrifts, submerged trails, swollen creeks. They were soaked and tense, watching their son closely for signs of hypothermia. Then they saw the man. He was walking alone at about 1.2 kilometers or a half mile from Narcissus Hut. His footsteps had been in the snow ahead of them for some time, and Simon had noticed something strange. The stride pattern was shortening, uneven, like whoever made it was starting to struggle. That man was Trevor. He didn't seem panicked, just exhausted. When Simon and his family caught up to Trevor, they asked if he was okay. Trevor said it was hard going, but he was managing. He asked how far it was to the next hut. Simon told him about just 10 to 20 minutes to the bridge, and then another 10 to 20 to Narcissus. Trevor nodded. He seemed lucid at the time, calm. His speech was clear, not slurring. He wasn't confused or shivering. But something still felt off. He was wearing the Arcuba hat, and that's something Simon noticed and thought was crazy. He knew the early signs of hypothermia, but he didn't see them. Not yet, but something about the encounter with Trevor stuck with him. Simon later said that under conditions like that, there's usually a kind of unspoken camaraderie between hikers, a shared instinct to look after one another. But with Trevor, that connection wasn't there. Simon offered some chocolate and suggested that they walk together for the final stretch. Trevor politely declined both. He was friendly, but distant, determined to stay alone. And so, as the light began to fade, they watched him disappear into the trees, still heading south, still pushing forward, still alone. Though Trevor hadn't shown any clear signs of hypothermia when Simon saw him, the truth was different. Looking back, he was already in the grip of it. The exhaustion, the shortened stride, the refusal of food, the insistence on staying alone. He was further gone than anyone realized. By July 15th, the search operation had grown. 16 police officers, more than a dozen trained SES volunteers, 2 helicopters, snowmobiles, alpine survival experts, tracking dogs. And a name. Trevor Tolput, 55 years old, last seen going into Pelion Hut, no exit signature. Helicopters became the eyes of the operation, when the weather allowed. But most of the work was on foot, and that was slow. Rescuers started returning to known points. Windmere Hut, Pelion, CO.AG, Burt Nichols. Every hut was checked for signs. The search team combed beneath the platforms and around outbuildings. Snow was dug away from nearby trees and brush and riverbanks. Nothing. No new footprints, no campfires, no tracks leading into the scrub. From above, the plateau looked clean, pure white. But the searchers knew better. Beneath that snow could be anything, and in some places it was over a meter deep. They had to search it all. Some focused on the high terrain, the ridges around Pelion Gap and Mount Osa, where a wrong turn could easily lead a solo hiker into steep terrain. Others scanned lowlands and creek beds where avalanche runout or hypothermia might force someone to stop. Each day, the weather shifted. Clear skies turned to hail. A chopper went up mid-morning and had to return half an hour later when clouds closed in. On July 16th, a ground team reached CO.AG Hut. The logbook confirmed what they feared. Trevor had still not signed in. If he made it past Pelion, he hadn't stayed in the huts. He'd either bypassed them or he hadn't made it that far. They swept the trail backward, following the most likely trail south from Pelion Hut. By this point, 4 days had passed since he was due to emerge. Each hour that went by, his odds diminished. Hypothermia isn't like other injuries. It doesn't come with drama. It creeps in, slowly. At first you shake, then you stop shaking. Your thinking gets strange, and you might take off your clothes. You might lay down to rest, and sometimes you don't get back up. Rescuers had seen it before. They knew what to look for: a body curled in the snow, a collapsed bivvy, a boot sticking out beneath the drift. But they found nothing. Back in Launceston, Lauren kept her phone beside her at all times. Each update came with a surge of hope, then a crash of waiting. Friends and family offered to come down, but she told them to wait. She didn't want to lose focus, she just wanted answers. She kept replaying the last time she saw him. Her dad in the passenger seat showing off his pack. Proud, confident. She remembered how lean he looked, how ready he seemed, how stubborn. He'd always been that way. Once when she was little, they got lost on a big hike. She panicked. He didn't. He sat her down, pulled out a snack and said, "It's not lost if you're learning." It became a kind of mantra. But this time, it felt different. Rescuers expanded the grid on July 17th. They moved deeper into the scrub, beyond searching off trail, gullies, side valleys, and beneath tree cover. They mapped possible escape routes someone might take if they had gone off the Overland. Still nothing. By now, Trevor had been missing for 5 days. That night, the temperature fell to 8 degrees Celsius or 17 degrees Fahrenheit on the plateau. Wind chill made it closer to -12 Celsius or 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Freezing fog rolled over the Pelion Gap. Searchers couldn't see more than 20 meters in any direction. They kept going. Every day started the same. Briefings at dawn, updated forecasts, equipment checks, zone assignments. Searchers rotated to prevent frostbite and fatigue. Helicopters flew when skies cleared. A thermal imaging drone was launched. But snow cover limits its effectiveness. Still, they swept the ridgelines and tree canopies hoping for a heat signature. The search expanded as far north as Windermere and as far south as Narcissus. On July 19th, a scent dog was flown in from Hobart, Tasmania. The team hoped for a breakthrough. Even the trace of a scent might point them towards a specific area. The dog was loaded into a snowcat and then taken towards Pelion. It found nothing. That evening, search managers met to reassess. The lead detective said what no one wanted to hear. The survival window had likely closed. But still, they continued. The Tolput family released a statement thanking search and rescue and police. Lauren posted an update online thanking the volunteers and asking people to not give up. She said that she believed her dad could still make it. She wasn't the only one. Some searchers had seen unlikely rescues. A solo hiker found 9 days later. A child recovered from a gorge almost a week later. It all had happened before, but time was running out. On July 19th, 6 days after the rescue began, the search team returned to the segment between Pelion and CO.AG one final time. They fanned out in a wide grid, probing under the fallen trees, around the rock outcrops, beneath the snowdrifts. 2 teams swept the track shoulder to shoulder, pausing every few meters to listen. At 12:45 p.m., a search police team reached a steep section of the track, just south of the Pelion Gap. The snow here was deeper than elsewhere, a wind-exposed plateau. Beneath the branches of a low pencil pine, they found an impression in the snow, a small collapse. One of the searchers knelt down and brushed it back. Trevor was there. He was lying partially on his side, wrapped in a sleeping bag, still zipped. His pack beside him, no tent. The snow had hidden him for days. There was no sign of trauma, no struggle, no panicked camp. His gear was neatly stowed, his boots were still on, like he'd stopped to rest. The coroner later determined that the cause of death was hypothermia, accelerated by exposure and exhaustion. They believed he passed somewhere between the evening of July 13th and the morning of the 14th. just a day after he was supposed to arrive at Narcissus' hut. The sleeping bag had likely preserved his body heat long enough to delay visible signs. But in the alpine cold, survival time without shelter was limited. He died alone, not far from the ridgeline he hoped to cross. When the news reached Lauren, she didn't speak. Not at first. The police said it was quick, peaceful. She asked if he'd written anything. They said no, but his notebook had pages torn out. Later she wondered if he had meant to keep going. If maybe he laid down just for a moment, a short rest, like he always did on long walks. Maybe he thought he'd get up again. Maybe he didn't realize it was the end. The next day, Trevor's body was airlifted from the track. The operation stood down. The volunteers packed up and flew home. The Overland was silent again. Winter moved on. And that's all I have for this video. That was definitely a heavy one, but if you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel. More stories are coming soon, and I hope to catch you at the next one.